Every time you book an Airbnb, you're trusting a stranger's home. Their pool, their balcony railing, their gas heater behind a closed bathroom door. Most trips end with a 5-star review and a suitcase full of dirty laundry. But in the cases we're covering today, guests checked in and never came home. Carbon monoxide, hidden pool drops, a party that turned into a massacre. 6 real deaths inside properties listed as safe places to stay. Case 1. The party that ended in gunfire. The listing said it was for a family reunion. That's what the renter told the homeowner when he booked the property on Lucille Way in Orinda, California, a quiet, affluent suburb in the hills east of San Francisco. A small gathering, maybe a dozen people. The owner took him at his word. By Halloween night, 31st of October 2019, more than 100 people were inside that house. Someone had posted an Instagram flyer advertising an Airbnb mansion party. Word spread fast. Young people showed up from across the Bay Area, dressed.
Is this the shit that just happened to where, damn, I'm spitting all on my mic and shit? God damn. Is this the shit that just happened like a couple, I think it was a couple months ago. And like it set on fire, and then like some people couldn't get out, and like 20 people died. I think that's what this is.
For Halloween, looking for a night out.
They say you can hear people screaming and shit. Like they say the you know how you bring the bottles and they got the sparkles in it. They say that's what caught all this shit on fire, and I think that's what this is.
By the time neighbors called police about the noise, the house was packed beyond any reasonable capacity, with no security, no screening at the door, and no one in charge. Then the shooting started. At least one person drew a firearm inside the crowded rooms. Rapid gunfire sent people scrambling over each other to get out, through doors, down the driveway, into the street. When police arrived, they found bodies inside and
This took a whole nother different turn. This definitely ain't what I was talking about.
on the property. Tion Farrow, 22, Ramon Hill, 23, Javen County, 29, Omar Taylor, 24, and Oceana Tompkins, 19, were all fatally shot that night. Several others were rushed to hospital with gunshot wounds. Investigators pieced together what had happened quickly enough. The renter had lied about the purpose of the booking. Airbnb's platform had no mechanism in place to catch that kind of deception before it happened. A private home in a residential neighborhood became a publicized party venue, and when conflict broke out in a space that size with no oversight, the consequences were exactly what you'd expect. No one has ever been charged with the killings. The case remains officially unsolved. The shooting did produce one concrete result. Airbnb's CEO publicly called the event horrific and announced a permanent ban on what the company termed party houses, along with new risk screening measures designed to flag high-risk bookings before they happened. The policy now exists because 5 people died. Whether it's consistently enforced is a separate debate. The homeowner rented his property believing it was going to a family for a quiet gathering. He had no reason to think otherwise. That's perhaps the most uncomfortable part of the whole story. He followed the process. The renter lied. The platform had no meaningful way to verify the claim. Nobody checked. A quiet residential neighborhood in the hills became a packed, publicized venue with no security and whatever weapons the guests chose to bring with them. Oceana Tompkins was 19 years old, the youngest of the 5 victims. By most accounts, she was simply someone who had gone out for Halloween. Tion, Ramon, Javen, and Omar ranged from 22 to 29. None of them had any reason to think the night would end the way it did. Their families are still waiting. Case 2. The gift she never opened. Leah Pierce was 20 years old, a nursing student at Simmons University in Boston, working as a certified nursing assistant at Massachusetts General Hospital. Her family described her as funny, unpredictable, deeply ambitious. Her mother said she was at the top of her game, happy, in love, excited about everything ahead of her. In early January 2023, Leah and her boyfriend flew to Cancun for a vacation. By the night of 6th January, they were singing "That's Amore" on the beach, according to her sister. It had been exactly the kind of day you go to Mexico for. Then they got back to the Airbnb and realized they'd locked themselves out. The keys were inside. The apartment was on the 3rd floor. Rather than call the host, knock on a neighbor's door, or wait for a locksmith, Leah decided to climb the outside of the building to reach the balcony. At night, 3 stories up. No rope, no harness, no one holding anything. She made it part way. Then she lost her grip. The fall was 3 stories straight down. Mexican authorities who responded to the scene determined she died instantly from the impact, the kind of trauma consistent with a fall from that height onto hard ground. Her boyfriend, who was present, was initially treated as a suspect because the couple had argued earlier in the evening. Police investigated quickly and cleared him. It was an accident, a completely avoidable one. Her family gave interviews to Boston media in the days that followed, trying to make sense of a loss that made no sense at all. A 20-year-old with a nursing career ahead of her, someone who spent her professional life learning how to keep other people alive, died climbing a building in the dark because she didn't want to wait for a locksmith. There's no villain in this story, and no lawsuit to point to. It was a decision made in a moment, the kind of impulsive choice that most people make and survive without consequence. What makes it land so hard is the gap between who Leah was and what killed her. She worked nights at Massachusetts General. She knew what the inside of an emergency room looked like. She was training for a career built on the idea that human life is worth protecting. None of that knowledge was available to her in the 2 seconds she spent deciding to climb rather than call. Her mother said she died so happy, so in love, so proud and excited about her future. Her sister remembered her as extremely unpredictable, extremely quirky, extremely funny. Those are the kinds of things people say when she told him she'd try. He had to live 100 years. She told him she'd try. He had to live with that. Case 3. The amenity that killed. The Airbnb listing photos showed a rope swing hanging from a large tree in the yard. It looked exactly like what it was meant to look like. A charming detail, something rustic and inviting, the kind of thing that makes a rental feel like more than just a place to sleep. Zach Stone, a tech journalist, booked the Austin, Texas property for his family's Thanksgiving in approximately 2013. The swing was part of the appeal. On Thanksgiving morning, Zach's father decided to try it. He approached the swing in the yard, sat down, and put his weight on the rope. The tree the swing was attached to split apart. The trunk, rotten internally, structurally compromised, its weakness invisible from the outside, sheared off and came straight down on top of him. Zach later described the moment in a long, detailed essay that became widely read in the years that followed. The trunk fell and struck his father's head, he wrote, immediately ending most of his brain activity. He sat with his father in hospital, understanding.
Bro, imagine that. Bro, imagine you chilling at the crib. Imagine you chilling at the crib. You like, I want to go outside and enjoy the sun today. Bro, you go outside, you sit on your swing. Immediately, as soon as you sit down, the fucking tree limb that the fucking branch is attached to falls a fucking part, fucking cracks you in your dome piece, and you fucking lose like 95% of your fucking brain. Holy shit, man. Damn, man. Man, my apologies to him, bro. Holy fuck. That's like a one in a million. You know what I'm saying, like story. That shit crazy.
Within hours that the man who had walked into that yard that morning was not going to come back. The swing had been advertised in the listing. The host had never had the tree inspected, never evaluated whether it was structurally sound enough to bear a person's weight. There was no warning, no disclaimer, no professional assessment, just a rope tied to a rotting trunk and a photograph that made it look like an amenity. Zach's essay became one of the more significant public critiques of Airbnb's approach to safety. He wrote that hosts were essentially self-certifying, that nothing was done to verify whether the features they advertised were actually safe. Nothing is currently done to make sure hosts actually comply with safety guidelines, he wrote, or even read them. The essay resonated specifically because the detail that killed his father wasn't a malicious act or a freak accident in the traditional sense. It was a photograph. A rope swing in a listing photo implied the swing was a feature, something the host was offering, something that was part of the experience. It implied someone had thought about it. Nobody had. A tree that looked solid from the outside was hollow with rot on the inside, and no one had ever looked closely enough to find out. Airbnb updated some safety language in the period after the piece circulated widely. The company did not introduce proactive property inspections. It did not require hosts to verify that advertised amenities had been checked by anyone qualified to assess them. A man died on Thanksgiving morning because a rope was tied to a dead tree, and the structural change it ultimately produced was largely a revision to some text on a website. Zach had booked the property partly because of that swing. He described it in his essay as the essence of leisure, of southern hospitality, of escape. His father walked toward it on a Thursday morning in November while the family was gathered inside, and he never walked back. Case 4. 3 Americans in Mexico City. Candace Florence, 28, Jordan Marshall, 28, and Cortez Hall, 33, flew to Mexico City in late October 2022 to celebrate Dia de los Muertos. Candace was an entrepreneur from Virginia Beach. Jordan was a teacher, also from Virginia Beach. Cortez taught in New Orleans. 3 friends, a long weekend, one of the world's great cities. They stayed in an Airbnb in an upscale neighborhood. By the morning of October 30th, all 3 of them were dead. At some point during their stay, a fuel-burning appliance in the apartment, most likely a heater or boiler, began leaking carbon monoxide. The gas is colorless and odorless. The first symptoms it produces are headache, nausea, and fatigue, identical to a flu coming on, easy to mistake for tiredness after a long travel day. Candace contacted her boyfriend in the United States at some point, saying she felt unwell. He got worried and called the Airbnb host, asking them to check on the group. By the time anyone entered the apartment, all 3 were already dead. The apartment had no working carbon monoxide detector. Family attorneys announced a wrongful death lawsuit and went public with a specific demand: that Airbnb stop treating CO detectors as optional and mandate them in every single listing worldwide. At the time of Candace, Jordan, and Cortez's deaths, Airbnb had already distributed around 200,000 free detectors to hosts globally. It had also, according to investigators, been aware of CO-related deaths at its properties for nearly a decade. The detectors remained a suggestion, not a requirement. Jordan's mother gave interviews in the weeks that followed. "We want to put pressure on Airbnb to regulate and mandate carbon monoxide detectors going forward," she said. The family's lawyer was more pointed. "They've created bans on parties, on weapons, on cameras. They could easily mandate carbon monoxide detectors too." It's a hard argument to refute. Airbnb has shown repeatedly that it can move fast when it wants to, banning security cameras in bedrooms, cracking down on party houses after Orinda, rolling out new ID verification systems. Each of those changes came after public pressure or a high-profile incident. Detector mandates hadn't come yet, despite years of deaths and years of advocacy from the families of victims. Candace Florence had flown to Mexico City to celebrate one of the most famous festivals in the world. Jordan Marshall was a teacher on a long weekend. Cortez Hall was 33, with a life and a career and people who loved him. All three were dead by the morning of October 30th, poisoned by a gas they couldn't smell or see in a flat that had no device capable of warning them. 3 people who flew to Mexico to enjoy a holiday came home in coffins. The appliance that killed them cost roughly the same to repair as a working detector costs to buy. Case 5. The shower. He never finished. Sebastian Mejia had earned a Fulbright scholarship. He was 24 years old, originally from Florida, and had moved to Rio de Janeiro to research indigenous communities, the kind of fieldwork that takes years of applications and select.
Chat, did you just heard what your 2 years, what they just said? Let me go back for you.
Indigenous communities. Originally from Florida, and had moved to Rio de Janeiro to research indigenous communities. The kind of fieldwork that takes years of applications and selection processes to reach. By October 2022, he was settled into a long-term Airbnb rental, the affordable kind you choose when you're living somewhere on a research budget rather than passing through as a tourist. On October 5th, 2022, he turned on the shower. The bathroom had a gas-powered water heater inside it, a common setup in Brazilian apartments, particularly older ones. The heater was malfunctioning. As Sebastian showered, it pumped carbon monoxide into the small, unventilated room. CO at concentration builds fast in an enclosed space. A hot shower already makes you feel lightheaded. The early symptoms of CO poisoning, warmth, slight dizziness, the sense that your body is getting heavy, blend seamlessly into what hot water does to you anyway. He didn't know what was happening. Nobody does, until it's too late. He lost consciousness in the shower. By the time anyone checked on him, he was dead. A police technical report later confirmed that CO levels in the apartment had reached 4 times the maximum acceptable threshold. There was no detector anywhere in the unit. His father flew to Brazil to collect his son's body. The family filed a lawsuit against Airbnb in California, asking the court not just for damages, but for an injunction, a court order that would force Airbnb to remove listings without CO detectors and to require inspections of fuel-burning equipment before properties could be listed. Sebastian's brother spoke to reporters afterward. "This shouldn't have happened," he said. "It was easily preventable. You should be able to go take a shower and not die." His mother was more concise. "They could pay us $1, she said. "But if they change the policy, it will be totally worth it." Investigators tracking CO deaths at Airbnb properties found at least 19 cases globally between 2013 and the time of Sebastian's death. Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, Chile, China, Taiwan, and more. Gas heaters, boilers, and water heaters in unventilated spaces. Different countries, different victims, the same mechanism. A detector that costs less than a dinner out would have alarmed, woken Sebastian, and bought him time to open a door. He didn't have one. The broader CO picture is worth pausing on. Airbnb announced in early 2014 that it would require hosts to confirm they had CO detectors in all listings by the end of that year. Nearly a decade later, that requirement still hadn't been enforced in any meaningful sense. The company had distributed around 230,000 free detectors to hosts, out of millions of active listings globally.
Right now. Still right fucking now. So I'm just confused. Is this what we talking about? This shit down there about to piss me off. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I fuck. Rest in peace to all the people that lost their life. I ain't even like like the shit that the motherfuckers is saying about to piss me off. Like, are we talking about the same people right now? They motherfuckers, these motherfuckers don't give a fuck about me or you, and we make any videos. What the fuck are we talking about? Like, I'm just confused. What are we talking about? What are we talking about? You know what I mean? Like,
The rest remained optional. Hosts self-reported. Nobody verified. Sebastian had moved to Rio to study indigenous communities, the culmination of years of academic work that got him to a Fulbright scholarship. He was 24. He had the kind of career ahead of him that people describe when they talk about someone having their whole life to look forward to.
About this job. This is what I want. Motherfucker, I don't even know about this job description. So how did you find out about this job description? Now, I know that shit be going on like this. I know that they put people in perspective to go around these places and do these nonchalant things to people in these communities, and it ends up like this. But I didn't know that this was a job description. Are you catching me? Am I beating around the bush good enough for you so you can get what I'm saying to you? I hope I am. That's all I'm saying. I hope I am. And we're going to leave it at that.
He didn't make it out of the shower.
I just want to know, how did a 24-year-old of foreign descent find out about this job description?
Case 6. The pool with no bottom warning.
Whether it's for the good or the bad, because he don't know. He don't know. So whether it's good or bad, because it's probably good for him, but where the information going to, I wonder.
Cameron Brown was 16. It was May 2023, spring break, and he was on vacation with his mother and grandmother at a rented home in Orange Park, Clay County, Florida. The property was listed on Airbnb. The reason they booked it was the pool. Cameron got in not long after the family arrived. The pool looked like a standard residential pool. Shallow end, deeper end, the kind you find behind half the houses in Florida. He waded in from the shallow side and moved forward. There were hidden slopes in the pool floor. Abrupt, unmarked drop-offs built into the design, with no depth warnings, no contrasting tile to indicate the transition, and no safety line across the change in grade. Despite the fact that eyelet hooks for exactly that kind of rope were already installed at the drop-off point. Cameron hit the first slope, lost his footing, and found himself suddenly in much deeper water. He couldn't get traction on the slick floor to pull himself back toward the shallow end. His mother, watching from nearby, realized what was happening and jumped in to try to reach him. She couldn't pull him out. Emergency services were called. By the time responders arrived and removed Cameron from the water, he could not be resuscitated. The family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Airbnb, the property owner, and related parties. It settled for $1.3 million, the full amount of available insurance coverage. The attorneys were explicit about what that settlement represented and what it didn't. Once Cameron lost his footing, one of them said, he would have been able to grab onto the line and get to safety. $100 rope attached to hooks that were already there, waiting to be used. Another lawyer involved in the case put it plainly. People renting through Airbnb, he said, need to start being treated with the same urgency as they treat making money off of their guests. The $1.3 million settlement was every dollar of available insurance coverage. The attorneys used it to make a public argument that pools in short-term rental properties should face the same disclosure and safety requirements as commercial facilities. Hidden slopes, abrupt grade changes, the absence of depth warnings. These are not unusual design features in older residential pools. They're common. What's unusual is renting a property to strangers, including teenagers, and children, without disclosing that the pool behaves nothing like what a typical swimmer would expect. Cameron's mother was in the water trying to reach her son. She watched what happened and couldn't stop it. That's the detail that doesn't get mentioned in the legal filings or the settlement press releases. $100 rope on an already installed hook. A depth marker on the pool floor. A single line in the listing that said the pool has unusual grade changes.
But I ain't gonna lie. Put it like this though. Put it like this. Is that really the Airbnb fault? Or is that your fault? Because I'm sure you've been around this pool when you got here. So you knew that this pool ain't have no rope in the first place. Because how would you shoot for that? I'm just saying. I'm just saying. So are we going to blame the Airbnb or are we going to blame ourselves? Or are we going to blame the Airbnb just because we don't want to blame ourselves? Which one? Let's be real. Let's be real now. Let's be real. Let's be real. I'm just saying, let's be real. I mean, we got that. That's what I'm saying. Motherfuckers don't even want to say shit that's really supposed to be said. And motherfuckers want to be pussyfooting and tiptoeing and bushwhacking around the bush, around all this shit. We ain't gonna do that. We got to be real with this shit, yo. Let's just be real with this shit. You know what I mean? And fuck that. I ain't looking at no Airbnb room. No, this your goddamn fault. Because you knew goddamn well good as well this shit ain't had no rope when you got here. So ain't no way he should have been, and his ass couldn't swim, his ass should have been out there
Any one of those things. And Cameron Brown goes home from spring break. 6 properties, 6 very different ways to die. And one thing running through all of them. The assumption that because something is listed, photographed, and available to book, it has been checked. It hasn't. A rope swing doesn't get inspected because it looks good in a photo. A gas heater doesn't get serviced because no one requires it. A pool gets listed with hidden drop-offs and hooks for a safety rope that was never attached. The question isn't whether Airbnb is inherently dangerous. Most stays end fine. The question is, at what point does the host is responsible stop being an acceptable answer when the same preventable deaths keep happening? Tell us what you think in the comments below. If this episode made you think twice about your next booking, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. We'll see you next time. Stay careful out there.